Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Меня зовут Михаил.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm Mikhail Kazantsev, and I'm partner of Yegorov, Puginsky, and Afanasyev. And partners, I'll moderate the session. And I would like to begin with a rather trivial but proper quote from the Chinese. God save you from living at the time of changes. And during the session, we would like to discuss how easy it is for the lawyers to live under the changes, at the time of changes, particularly if we work in the world of M&A. So there are a lot of innovations. The innovations in the civil code, sometimes we have to rethink even the theory of the civil law. And at the same time, there are additional opportunities for the structuring of the deals on the basis of the Russian law. And we would like to discuss whether it is possible to move over from the Anglo-Saxon law to the Russian law. Then the laws on deoffshorisation would definitely require revision of the corporate structures, and the management systems have to be built in compliance with the new realities. Sanctions introduced by certain countries, Russian business and some individuals, which complicate the compliance procedures and strengthen the importance of the due diligence procedures, limited funding from the international financial institutes, and the increase of the bad debts within Russian banks. So we would like to discuss on how to structurize transactions without funding and, with limited funding. And other issues associated with sanctions, the creeping sanctions, and in spite of the fact that there are certain obvious bans, there are gray zones which do not make it possible for the international investors to carry out even legitimate deals, because the main message of our Western colleagues is be cautious, and the Western investors sometimes reject and deny deals, although they're not within the framework of the sanctions, obviously. And, of course, the exchange rate fluctuation makes the assessment of business and the evaluation of the business extremely difficult. We also need to say that Russian legislation of recent time is quite raw, so to speak, and the law on controlled foreign companies, for example, has been amended twice over the past few months. So considering all of that, the law firms reprofile themselves. The in-house lawyers try to diversify the pool of consultants. Businesses looking for new investors look east and try to structurize deals with limited bank funding. So these questions require answers, or at least we need to think about the directions we need to move in search of these answers. And together with our speakers, we will try to find the proper routes. Allow me to introduce Andrei Tsilikovsky, State Secretary, Deputy Head of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service of the Russian Federation, Robin Wittering, partner, law firm Yegorov, Puginsky, and Afanasyev and Partners, Tatiana Udaltsova, member of the Management Board, Bank of Moscow, Rupert Boswell, Reynolds Porter Chamberlain, LLP, Chairman. Piotr Marchevsky, who is the Managing Director of Thomson Reisen for Russia and CIS, Maria Miroshnikova, partner from Ivanian and Partners, and Wenjing Tian, partner, King and Wood Melisons. Without putting off the discussion, we would like to ask Tatiana to present her vision from the point of view of the person who works in the legal service of a major bank, state bank. Changes, how did they affect the business, and how does business adapt to the new rules of the game? Now, I would like to start with thanking you for the honor to open the discussion today. I believe that M&As are among the most interesting deals in this field of corporate law. For each and every one, there is a drama of human relations. In certain cases, it is structurized and peaceful and quiet. In other cases, a deal resembles a battle of gladiators in front of everybody. For example, there is this triangle we can watch of three pharmaceutical giants, pharmaceuticals, Milan and Mirigo, where $50 billion is the win, and there's hostile mergers and acquisitions, or the story of Nabisco described in the book Barbarians at the Gate. As for the impact of the new ideas and their impact on business, we can say that 2014 at the Russian market of M&As distinguished itself because it went against the global trends, and everything that could be done in the reverse order was done at the Russian market. The global M&A market actually reached its historical record of the year 2007, when the volume of global deals reached $4 trillion. And last year, the global market of M&A demonstrated $3.3 trillion, while the number of deals at the Russian market went down. The average ticket on a deal was $69 million, and as compared to the global scale, it's a weak trend. And with all of that, I would like to say that the pessimism of the analysts that we will discuss today, the pessimism associated with 2015 and with the fact that the even lower activity at the market of M&A is forecasted, is mostly related with the volume rather than with numbers. And my optimism is associated with the trend that we can see in the banking sector. The trend associated with the fact that the banks today are quite active with collecting pledge, and the Central Bank of the Russian Federation has demonstrated numbers from which it follows their portfolio of Russian banks and the Russian companies increased in 2014 by 53%. And we can say that today there are no reasons to believe that this trend is going to slow down, because according to the information of the Central Bank, the volume of debts in commercial banks is over 2 trillion rubles, and according to the assessment of Sokhov, deputy head of the central bank, by the end of the year, this amount will increase by 900 billion rubles. Well, of course, the capital of the borrower in the capital of the bank is just a fact of necessity, and sometimes it is possible to get rid of the assets of the bank, optimizing this part of business in order to get back the loaned money. So the activity at the M&A market is going to increase, and for the analysts, the volume is not going to be that significant, but for lawyers, the number of deals is more important, because practically every M&A transaction requires participation of a large number of lawyers, and the market situation from the point of view of royalty doesn't work in favor of lawyers. Well, that means we have to work with a large number of deals. And as for another trend in the banking sector that I would like to mention, using the example of the bank I work for, today we can see that the bank assets are merging. On the whole, the banks are doing that in order to make their business bigger. This is necessary to follow the norms of prudential supervision. Last week, a potential deal on the conversion of shares, that's the board of directors believes in, of Absolute and Возрождение, is an example of consolidation. Moreover, there is active work continued on the sanation of banks. As a rule, as investors, credit institutions take part in this work, and so this is to continue. Now, a couple of works about the novelties in the legislation that can be believed to be very important steps in the development of the corporate legislation will definitely have an impact on the M&A market. And I'm talking here about the amendments that next week are to be enacted. Among the most important here, the key amendments, I would like to mention and this is my personal viewpoint, but I do believe that of particular importance is the amendment concerning the inclusion into the civil code of the norms of the auctions and auction agreements. I think it's most important. It will have an impact on the notion of the auction as such. Until now, as you know, they were regulated by the legislation concerning securities, and in most cases there were derivatives, and the courts formed a rather strange and faulty practice in relation to them. They applied to the options the norms of Article 57 of the Civil Code, and this is not quite correct. This definitely does not comply with the notion of the option agreement, and that's the notion that we're used to understand in a particular way, and our counterparts from abroad. The option agreement and the options as such are regulated in different ways. In the Anglo-Saxon system of law, interprets these norms, expanding them. Of course, these notions were born there, and their legislators in the field, the German and the French codes, treat these provisions differently, and it is important to see how the judicial practice is to be formed, and how far and in what particular form the judicial attitude will go, treating, interpreting this work. I do doubt that it's going to be easy, because for the courts it will be difficult to go beyond their normal ways of interpretation. And the option agreements are a part of the flexible and living legal system that has deep roots and traditions, and it's impossible to resolve this particular problem through direct borrowing of notions from the civil code. We're introducing the new norm that will regulate the option agreements. It does not mean at all that it's going to work. The law on KICS has been amended twice, and the enforcement practice here is going to be gained through pain and struggle. Another new development, it's the norm associated with guarantees, and in the contract law of Russia it has taken root, and the banks are using this particular norm. And as for the contracts that are not part of our discussion, I'm talking about the credit agreements and the different types of covenants. But nonetheless, the notion of the essential facts and factors on which the other party relied when signing the contract is an important institute. In pre-revolutionary Russia it existed, but in a rather narrow way. It was just the word of the merchants, and there was no legislation pertaining to that, which was different from the Anglo-Saxon system. But nonetheless, the Institute of Guarantees of Assurances does exist, and it will have a sort of a disciplining impact for the counter agents in deals, because the principle associated with the right for justice is consolidated through that. The parties must be honest and act in the spirit of good faith. And the assurances and warranties are, of course, considered in a different way. The discretion of court, the case law, the guarantees and assurances in our system will be all part of the law. This is a norm that at the moment is not quite clear in its enforcement. The indemnity category, that's another category we need to discuss. I looked at different viewpoints concerning that. The law is already mixing notions. Some believe that indemnity should be considered as a provision associated with insurance and should be under the legislation for insurance. Others believe that it's a norm associated with trusteeship, and so we already can see this mixed up, and we will definitely encounter that in the near future when we implement the norms. Another form of liability is the pre-contract liability, which is on both parties before signing the contract. This liability is important for both parties because it disciplines the parties. The parties that begin the bad faith negotiations. But again, how can we prove that there was damage because there was no possibility of entering the same type of deal with a third party? Now, there is no difference at present in the impact of these norms on the banks, on the state companies, or banks with state participation, on any other party in the civil transactions is obvious. It means we still have to do a lot. And definitely the most serious responsibility, the heaviest burden, should be on the courts because they will have to interpret the norms. And at present, I don't think there is anyone who will be able to predict how the courts will go beyond the customary on the assurances and guarantees, for example. Will they be able to go beyond the tradition of the application of Article 178 of the Civil Code, or will look at these deals as these deals carried out in confusion? No, we still have a lot to do, and I wish all of us success because this is a very difficult type of work, but most interesting at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Being a moderator, I will ask a brief question. You said that banks are actively recovering and are involved into the restructuring and management of sales. As to new transactions, do the money have the funds to finance new transactions? How do they solve the problems of financing abroad, particularly public bank? As to the liquidity, there are some problems related to liquidity. Not everything is as good. Generally, today, the situation is deteriorated. By the first period of adoption to the new economic conditions has passed, and the situation becomes better. Transactions are concluded with the Asian banks. Whether they will be able to cope with the situation, whether the agreements on financing concluded now, including the agreements of China, will help to solve all the problems with liquidity. However, how these transactions will be regulated, what additional obligations will be imposed on the banks. It is not quite clear. We are just at the initial stage, and we cannot say that today classical M&A transaction when the bank just acquires the assets because it has an investment department that would like to invest into the assets and to restructure it and to sell at profit. Such transactions are quite few, and as regards the commissions of bankers, the situation is worse than it was last year. The commissions of the investment bankers decreased significantly, and we have to recognize now that such transactions for investment bankers are not regular but episodical. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Peter Marchevsky, who is Chief Executive Officer of Thomson Reuters for Russia and SAG.
About the M&A deals in 2014 and 15 and your views of where it could go further. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, just afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the forum. It's a great experience to be here in the historic city of St. Petersburg with such a distinguished panel and such a distinguished audience, so thank you very much. I'd like to use these few minutes to give you a few facts and thoughts about the global M&A activity. I'll connect to what Tatiana started off, the size of the market. In the global terms, I'll also go into trends in the emerging markets, and I'll, in the final part of my presentation, I'll show you some data for Russia. Before I do that, just a slight comment. Thomson Reuters itself is a fruit of a big merger, as you might recall. In 2008, Thomson acquired Reuters, and we became the world-leading information company for businesses and professionals. We also have some merger and acquisition experience which is relevant to you, ladies and gentlemen. Parts of the Thomson Reuters family are companies such as Westlaw and Practical Law Company, which some of you might know. And we also have great M&A experience in Russia itself. We acquired two companies. Jingo was the first one. It's a company that specializes in gene analysis that's relevant to our customers in pharmaceutical industries, in scientific field, in the field of science. And most recently, a year and a half ago, we acquired a company called Cortez, which is a leading provider of oil and gas information out of Russia, which is a very interesting information for our customers, not just in Russia, but also globally. Every day in Thomson Reuters, there's a dedicated group of people that comes to work to monitor, gather the facts, various facts about mergers and acquisitions, and put them into our products for different audiences. Lawyers include that audience, as well as investment bankers predominantly. And as I said in the beginning, I'll now go and show you first some global data, then I'll go into emerging markets, and I'll share some thoughts on the trends in Russia. The first slide shows data for the first quarter of 2015, so a very fresh cut of data. What I would draw your attention to is several facts. First of all, at the very bottom of the slide, you see the total value of mergers and acquisitions globally has reached $842 billion in the first quarter of 2015. And as you see in the bottom right corner, that's a 23% increase year on year. So that's a 23% increase versus the same data in the first quarter of 2014, making it the strongest first quarter since 2007. So globally, we've just had the strongest quarter since the world financial crisis in 2008. I think it's quite a notable number. Looking at the data that underpins these numbers, I came across one interesting fact, which is, you know, when you add the values of the transactions, it's the biggest transactions that make the biggest impact, obviously. And the threshold that we in our analysis apply is a threshold of $5 billion. And we had 27 such deals in the first quarter of 2015. So 27 deals bigger than $5 billion, which is a 59% increase over last year. So that clearly drove the numbers to the very high levels. So many very, very big transactions. In terms of the number of transactions, which is also on the slide, 9,307 deals in Q1, which is just a 3% decrease over last year. So we have a little fewer transactions, but in volume there's a significant increase. Now, looking at the geographic performance, which I think you'll find very interesting, clearly on the top of the chart, United States, nearly $400 billion, so nearly half of the entire Q1 M&A activity happened with the targets in the United States. And there's also a remarkable fact about that. This was a 27% increase for United States year on year, and it was the strongest first quarter in US M&A activity since the year 2000, ladies and gentlemen. So we're talking about the 15-year high in the United States. So clearly a very active mergers and acquisitions market there. But it's not just the United States. Asia Pacific, very interestingly, when you look at the numbers in a combined way in Asia Pacific, with just under $230 billion worth of transactions, had the strongest first quarter since our records began, and we collect this data since 1980. So for Asia Pacific, this was the strongest first quarter, at least in 35 years, if not longer than that. What I'm not showing in a slide, but we obviously have that data behind these numbers, is the sectorial cut. I think this is also interesting for you, especially when you think about your business development plans in the country and in the region. Healthcare, real estate and telecom are the sectors that led the activity globally. Just as an example, in healthcare alone, $110 billion worth of deals in the first quarter of 2015, but not all the sectors are growing. So for example, media and entertainment sector enjoyed more than 50% decline in the first quarter of 2015. Finally, to sort of finish on the global side of things, something that I think is dear to everyone heart here in the room, whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a businessman like myself, which is making money. So we also analyze how much money people make on M&A transactions, and I'm pleased to report that globally completed M&A advisory fees went up by 3%. So $6.4 billion were made in the advisory field around these M&A transactions in the first quarter of 2015. So a very optimistic and very upbeat picture globally. A very strong first quarter of 2015. Now I'll move to the emerging markets. In emerging markets, the total activity reached $190 billion.
Piotr, I'm terribly sorry. You've got only 5 minutes, so can we move a little bit closer to Russia?
We'll move closer to Russia. Fair enough, fair enough. Okay, so emerging markets, $190 billion worth of activity globally, which is a 42% increase. So very strong performance out of the emerging markets. And out of $190 billion, $100 billion came from China. So that's another very interesting fact for you. How dominant China is in M&A activity. I think it's very relevant to the conversation about Russia already. I know China is a big topic in Russia. I think we will hear later also on the panel about this. My analysis of the data shows that in M&A terms, whilst there is a lot of there's a lot of dialogue between Russia and China, bilateral dialogue, bilateral commercial relationships, that hasn't yet translated into an increase of M&A activity. So there's a very few, a handful of deals between the two sides. On the second slide, I'll show you something that I think is an interesting piece of data for the emerging markets still, which is the ranking of legal firms active in the field of mergers and acquisitions. And as you see, Linklaters came on top of the ranking with $14.5 billion worth of transactions, followed by Clifford Chance and Leighton Watkins. I think what's also, when I was looking at this data, what is very remarkable for me is the second column in the data, which is how these firms are moving in the ranking. So Clifford Chance, Linklaters went from the 8th spot to the first one, Clifford Chance from the 24th spot to the second, and Leighton Watkins came from the 72nd spot. So I think what it indicates to me, and when I analyze this data, is a huge level of competitive dynamics between the law firms bidding for this business. Now I guess in the interest of time, I'll move to Russia. Maybe just one more interesting fact. I think it is interesting for you when you're advising your customers. Average EBITDA multiples. What I found quite remarkable is the fact that, first of all, the average EBITDA multiples in the transactions are rising. So they rose in emerging markets to 16.4. And there is a big regional discrepancy here. So, for example, Middle East and North Africa, EBITDA multiples add up to 11.1 times, whereas in China it's 20.1. So nearly double the valuations of the companies in China. And finally, I move to Russia. So announced M&A transactions, as I showed in the previous slide, announced M&A transactions in Russia reached nearly $2.7 billion, which is a 58% decline. I think that confirms the findings of the previous speaker on the panel, that Russia kind of goes against the flow at the moment. Russia moved in this ranking from the 19th position to the 27th position in Q1 2015, and 32% of Russian deals were domestic, involving Russian acquirer. United States, interesting, was the most active acquiring nation in Russia, and that was bolstered by the Schlumberger planned $1.7 billion purchase of stake in Eurasia Drilling. Energy, the other interesting view is the sectorial view. Energy and power, driven by the Schlumberger deal, energy and power was clearly the most active sector with 86% of deals. Russian outbound M&A totaled $3.6 billion, and that's an 81% increase compared to the first 3 months of 2014. However, that was also driven by one big transaction, and that's the Alpha Telecom $2.8 billion offer to buy back their stake in Turkcell in Turkey. I would show you a couple more quick slides. One is the drivers of M&A in Russia. 1 minute, yes. One is the driver of M&A transactions in Russia. I just wanted to kind of confirm that the macroeconomic factors play a very important role, and we clearly see a correlation on the slide when you look at the oil price, the ruble value, and the total value of mergers and acquisitions. We also looked at the top 50 transactions in the period of 2010 and 2015, and the finding there is a big role of the government in the M&A transaction in Russia. 56% of the top 50 transactions between 2015 and now involved government entities, and in value terms, 68%, or $109 billion of transactions represent deals with the government involvement of government entities. Final slide, just showing you the dynamics of over time of M&A in Russia. I guess I'm an optimist, so I'll share with you the optimistic interpretation of the facts, which is, if you look at the last crisis, in 2008, the market really only took a couple of years to bounce back to decent levels in M&A. And I let you interpret what this means for the future. To summarize before I hand the floor back to Mr. Speaker, to summarize, a very healthy field. M&A remains a very healthy field of activity in the global markets. In emerging markets, China clearly stands out, not yet in its relations with Russia, but clearly stands out with the size of transactions. And then I gave you a few pointers which can be useful for your business planning, business development activities, such as the importance of US in the overall global M&A markets, such as the sectorial views, both globally and in Russia, where the oil and gas or energy and power sector is hugely important, and then also the importance of government in the whole M&A activity in Russia. Thank you very much, and with that I'll pass the floor back to Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Следующим выступит Андрей Юрьевич.
Next speaker is Andrei Silikovsky. Now, the data of the Anti-Monopoly Service, does it prove the lower number of M&A deals, and what are the new trends, and what is the fourth anti-monopoly package, and the law on foreign investments and strategic aspects of that? What can you say about these issues? Now, over the past few years, Anti-Monopoly Service encountered a lot of changes. We have a lot of laws now for which we are responsible. We have the favorite graph that Igor Artemyev displays quite often, that displays how from small laws that we controlled, we have moved to an enormous set of laws, about 20 of them altogether, and we are responsible for controlling them. As you know, notification claims, this is something that we are not looking into any longer, notification particularly. And what do we start our investigation of cartels and of M&As? These are the two whales, so to speak, that the antitrust policy began with. And if we no, actually, for us, for those who are in St. Petersburg now, there is always that boat of Peter the Great. The Russian Navy and fleet began with that. And the number of these deals, I'm not going to talk about the overall number of M&A deals, but we do not have that much statistics. I will speak about the applications that we deal with. The number of these applications, fortunately, has been reducing from year to year, and this was a focused policy of our agency. And we increased manifold the threshold limits for the deals that require coordination. The deals below 7 billion are not interesting for us. Beginning with 2014, we do not deal any longer with deals that require notification after the deal, so they do not exist any longer. There are just a few hundred deals that are very big and that are of key importance for the economy of the country. So I also need to say that there is a second filter we deal with, the law 57. That's control over the deals that are carried out with involvement of foreign investments. We do not come up with our own conclusion. We just coordinate the work of the public authority before the government commission looks into the matter. So we carry out the economic analysis, and if its result complies with the results, with the analysis carried out on the basis of the law competition, we present it for briefing. So the number of these deals is not that big. As I said, we raised the barriers, but we made our requirements to disclosure much stricter. The overall ideology of our agency is to reduce the number of these deals, and the M&As that we look into has decreased. Now, opening your question. In 2014, it reduced quite considerably, while prior to that, mostly associated with legislation, but actually in 2014, this was a result of lower economic activity. I do not have statistics for the first half year 2015. As a rule, we make all our assessments on the basis of half a year, and I will try to ask our colleagues to hurry up with this process so that we can present the results at the Economic Forum. But the number of transactions was about 240 in 2013 and about 180 in 2014. That's the ones that went through the agency. Among them, the number of deals that go through the government agency did not change, about 20. They are major deals. So that's statistics. Now, some may ask, why do you need M&As? And deals, M&A deals, if you hardly deny them. No, I'm actually happy that we do not have to deny these deals that often, because as a rule, the ones that reach us are well prepared. Practically all the major investors, before applying to us, ask for our interpretation in legal terms of what might happen if the deal is to be concluded. And if they see our negative attitude, then they either do not go with the deal any further, or change their deals in such a way that they do not contradict the anti-monopoly law. So this preliminary work and higher level of literacy, so to speak, legal literacy, leads to a lower number of refusals. So if there is a refusal, that means that your colleagues are not professional at all, not realizing that there will be a refusal, or there is an absence of the wish of the investor to go deep into the matter. So, in fact, we carry out control over the proper enforcement of the anti-monopoly rules, and this sort of a preliminary control in place. So the deals that do not comply with the legislation hardly ever concluded. So this is the main factor of our work. We keep working on the disclosure matter concerning investors, of course. So no, it's not just simple knowledge for us, but we need to exercise real control. And if our legislation is extraterritorial, we look at foreign deals and Russian assets, but Russian assets abroad, we need detailed information. And we have done a lot over these years. I remember how difficult it was for us to know who the real proprietors were. And one of the oligarchs in Russia said, the owner of these 5 factories and 5 steamers, that's me. And we remember this historical document, but, well, this particular man died 5 years after the document was compiled. Anyway, I would like to warn our colleagues that we always carry out very strict policy. We safeguard the commercial secret. Confidentiality is a very important aspect of our work, and you do know that this information never leaves the walls of our agency. But a disclosure is very much needed, otherwise we cannot carry out analysis. And in our next initiatives, in the 4th anti-monopoly package, and our counterparts are discussing it in the next room. It's a pity that we are doing that at the same time. Now we could do it together. So we are moving towards easing the requirements to these deals. The famous register of monopolists is the matter of the past. It's 35%. This register required collection of a lot of information, made it very difficult to sign these deals. And this, if the deputies support us, then the register is going to disappear. We'll bury it. But although for many years our colleagues were fighting for it and against it, I remember that when adopting the law on competition in 1996, we're trying to do that, but there were many supporters. I'm sure this year it is going to die out. The preliminary order of the procedure of the coordination of deals joint activity. That's also important. We are changing our view on that. While previously all the types of these deals were cartels or similar to those, so nowadays we're going to introduce a whole class of permitted deals. So once again, I would like to emphasize that our general ideology is the simplification of the order of consideration of these deals. So we look at the considerable reduction of the number of these deals, but with all of that, we carefully investigate every single deal of this type. Andrei Yurovich, thank you so very much. Now, two questions, if I may. First, you said, and it's really true, the confidentiality of the disclosed information is a fact. But with the enforcement of the law on controlled foreign companies, how are you going to act? Because for them it is so easy to address you and to ask for the disclosure of the list of beneficiaries. And is there any sort of order of the discussion of the matter? Well, frankly speaking, at the moment, fortunately, we have not begun to work on that, and we haven't had any applications from the tax authorities. Now, probably it's quite interesting to work with your colleagues. If the fourth anti-monopoly package is in work, then we could think of the anti-monopoly secret. There must be a special order associated with the requests for the information. Nowadays, there is only one exception for the law and order enforcement authorities. You spoke about the liberalization of the coordination work associated with the anti-monopoly law. But in media and in the professional community, we are very much concerned with the new initiatives. The uncertainty of deals with foreign participation, when the foreign investor is unable to understand whether the deal is to be coordinated or not. A very simple example, the Schlumberger deal, without acquiring 50%, but 40 plus the potential option, which does not provide them with a vote, gave the application following the 57th law, and now this application is going to be considered once again at the State Commission. So will it be clearer which deals require coordination and which do not require that? And otherwise, they will leave under the sort of American rules when you do not know which deals fall into which group. Now, Law 57 in this sense is somewhat more complex. First of all, for its lifetime, many are unhappy with the amendments of the anti-monopoly law. They say there is an amendment after amendment coming, but among the professional lawyers there are hardly any objections to that, because we definitely do what you probably believe not to be quite proper, but we do what is supported by the legal community. Let's not forget the anti-monopoly legislation and proper legislation in Russia is only 25 years old. world. Prior to that, we had lived under the planned economy, where there was no competition as such. But over 25 years, this law has been tested. And if you remember the first law on competition at the markets, and then you look at the existing law, you will see that it went through a very hard way of detailization. So even now, when you look at the competition law, you will see there is a lot of interpretation there, because it cannot provide a clear interpretation of all the details, but it is detailed, and nonetheless. And Law 57 is a young law and has been in power since when? Since the year 2008, yes. So it has been in place for 7 years, and it's very short term for a new law, a law that had not have any predecessor in our system. And we keep working on this law. As you know, we are very often acting as a driver of amendments, introducing specifications, introducing details, and well, of course, we follow the continental law, not the Anglo-Saxon law, but still we have a number of cases collected, and thus investors can follow the analogy, and they understand already what particular class of deals they are within. And so our favorite topic of Schlumberger. Now, this issue was raised in a negative way, and as soon as it became known that the deal is going to be concluded, there was a lot of negative reaction. As soon as this information appeared, we had to deal with our colleagues and the heated discussion of the hockey match. Everyone was coming up with their own arguments, and the discussion was turning into not exactly parliamentary. Our focus was not on the 50% and going beyond that, although of course there was an option there, and the option had a meaning there. But for us of importance was the fact that we interpret unilaterally the actions and the deal. The deal and the subject of the deal has an impact on survey and geological survey, and this requires a much lower level of coordination. So very often we get questions about the deals before they actually signed, and so our counterparts from Schlumberger asked for our opinion. We said that we believed that we come to our conclusions on the basis of a certain number of factors. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Robin Wittering.
A foreign lawyer doing deals under English law for a long time, but for the last couple of years you've been
a sanctions lawyer
working in Russia, in the Russian law firm, doing only Russian-based deals. So can you give your double sides of the story from a Western perspective, as well as a practical advice, how deals are done in the current environment?
I think I'm going to talk a little bit about M&A in force majeure circumstances, and I think we've got 4 force majeure circumstances at least at the moment, one of which is sanctions, one of which was the oil price collapse. The third is, I think, the impending sovereign default by the Ukraine. And the fourth, much less, but relevant to structuring, is the $50 billion UCOS award, which influences the attachment of Russian cash flow. I look at it in phases. So I remember being at the Sochi Olympics, which were great, by the way, and I got a phone call that there was going to be some bad news coming. And I think in the 12 months since the Sochi Olympics, we were in lockdown. I think, as the statistics show, there wasn't really much M&A. There wasn't really any new money M&A. There was some restructuring away from sanctions to the extent that is possible. What I see now happening, and I think I'm going to quote Vladimir Potanin, so I'm in good company, we're in a sort of a new equilibrium now. We're in a new equilibrium of the dollar ruble. We're in a new equilibrium of the oil price, I think, albeit with some volatility. So to answer Mikhai's question directly, what I see clients doing now is they're thinking about what will be the new standard bankable structure in the Russian market for the next 10 years. We've all lived under what was the bankable Russian structure from 2003 to 2013. Cyprus, English law, people like me in pinstripe suits, you know, coming to your country. Although I'm now with a Russian law firm, so it's okay, I think. And I think we're actively, for a significant number of clients, looking on a structure whereby Singapore is being very much mentioned, because what I think people are trying to build is there's a pent-up demand for strategic investment from Korea, India, China, the list goes on, it's a pretty clear list. And those guys, and ladies, sorry, they want to come in and we have to structure around sanctions. What we've learned, the biggest lesson I learned from sanctions is that you have a major problem, not because of what sanctions say, but if you have an EU person, or if you have a US person who controls a share transfer order, for example, your whole structure can be blocked. So what we're currently focused on right now is building structures such that if sanctions escalate and somebody wants to exercise a put option, if sanctions escalate, it can be immediately executed. We are actively putting in place structures derived from Anglo-Saxon private equity, step-in rights, warehousing of assets, so that if big strategic investors come in, if there is a problem, they do not lose their investment. They maybe don't exercise any quasi-management control, and we wait for this period of freeze to pass, as it will pass. So we did, just to reiterate, we did phase one, which was lockdown. As the statistics show, we're in phase two, which is preparation for the next wave of new money capital. I don't think, I'm speaking for myself, not my firm now, it's not clear to me, I've spent a lot of time in Asia, unsurprisingly, for the anticipated pivot to Asia over the last 12 months. I have to say I'm somewhat skeptical myself, and I think the statistics show that. I think personally believing there's a wall of money coming from China in the private space, as opposed to government pipeline, oil and gas supply, which is not, okay, it could be M&A, but it's not really M&A, is a different thing. So I see a lot of syndication. I see syndication between oligarchic groups doing deals. I see attempts to find ways to bring in foreign capital in synthetic instruments so you can take Russia risk at depressed prices with a currency tilt. And so we're spending, I think, most of our time on building that new structure. We come up against, and I make no comment from a, if you like, English nationalistic perspective of English law and its supremacy. What I always say is there's only two sorts of people who'll never be unemployed, sushi chefs and English lawyers. We're coming up against deoffshorisation, de-dollarisation, the increasing liberty, freedom of contract of Russian law, all of which will argue in due course that my children will not be practicing English law in Moscow in the same way that I've been fortunate to do so, but I don't know what time frame that will be in. And now I just want to touch on another thing, which I think is very immediate and isn't really being factored into the Financial Times coverage, which is what I see as a mismatch between what politicians, including my own Prime Minister, talk about and what's going on in the ground, in the ground oil, but on the ground. And this is the business situation between Ukraine and Russia. So forget politics, you can't forget politics, forget problems, you can't forget problems. But a lot of Russians have business interests in Ukraine. Obviously, a lot of Ukrainians have business interests in Russia. And what I see as a current very strong trend is people attempting to cross-fertilize and cross-syndicate to hedge I'm personally involved in, that's a big focus at the moment. And the final thing, which I also do not think is getting as much attention because everybody's focused on Greece, is the Ukrainian sovereign debt situation. I don't really say much more than I think that's going to be big news in the next 3 to 6 months, and I think it will impact on M&A practice. And the final thing, which again I am personally a bit surprised about, is that this $50 billion UCOS award, with the way that international Anglo-Saxon dominated law of public international law, which means that the assets of state-owned enterprises could be under some form of attack. I think that has to be factored in. But I have to say, I come across what to me feels like quite a lot of complacency about that issue, whereas for me it's a real risk factor. Mikhail, I'm conscious we're sort of running a bit late, so I was going to stop there with those thoughts. Okay, so just, really? There's quite a lot of other speakers. Okay, so what I see, I now want to specifically address how we're dealing with sanctions risks, if you like, as an English contract lawyer. I haven't seen anybody who's prepared to give a cash indemnity for sanctions risk. I've been in a number of meetings on both sides of it, both you might call the Russian side and the other side, and everybody laughs when you ask for a cash indemnity. So if anybody's managed to negotiate one, you're a better negotiator than me, and I've been around a long time, so maybe too long. So what we're seeing is, the way it's being structured is, notwithstanding deoffshorisation, there's a higher level entity which has no EU or US persons involved in it in any way, except by coming up with the idea in the first place, of course. And that's, if you like, the vehicle by which a temporary exit, a warehousing, is structured. There's then a lot of hard fight in contractual negotiation as to, if I'm a significant sovereign wealth fund and I've invested, say, $1 billion into a new Russian asset, and then there's a sanctions risk event, okay, you might persuade me that I'll sit on the sidelines for 5 years, but I think you're going to struggle to persuade me that I don't want some form of comfort that you're going to manage the asset in a nice way and make sure my interests are protected. So that's, I think, the new big battlefield that I see in M&A. Now I'm in effectively the biggest part of my clientele is Russian now, rather than a few years when I was on the foreign side. So on the Russian side, what I'm sort of saying to our clients is we have to, both through the liberalisation of anti-monopoly law, frankly, which is good progress, through the liberalisation of the Russian civil code, which is decent progress, but in my opinion is not there yet. And my colleagues get upset when I say that, but that is my view. We need to persuade them that there will be a level of state support because of the extraordinary events which are sanctions and political risks, which are kind of unprecedented, because Russia, as we all know, is sort of being treated a bit like Iran and North Korea, which is, you know, with the risk of being a little bit political, somewhat extreme. So I think we'll see over the next 6 to 9 months, and that appears to be the view that a certain number of prominent Russian business people are talking on CNBC and Bloomberg, that over the next 6 to 9 months and come the third quarter of this year, some of these deals will sort of come on stream. We'll have a certain level of clarity as to what the new structure will be. So I'll finish up. So a year ago at the Sochi Legal Forum, or Sochi Economic Forum, I shared a platform with the government, and I was in a difficult situation because I kind of needed to say, maybe there's going to be a lot of distressed deals, maybe it's going to all be very difficult. This year I feel much more positive, but actually the M&A problems are actually much more complicated and are some of the hardest. So to sort of answer Mikhail's other question, what's it like to be an English lawyer in Moscow at the moment? From a pure intellectual perspective, it's some of the most interesting times, because for 2003 to 2013, it was always the same structure. There was a standard deal when you went to see a state-owned organisation of what you were going to get and how it was going to be. And frankly, it was getting a little boring. Now it's certainly not boring. Misha, I'll finish there.
In line with what you just said, Robin, why don't you try to have cash indemnity governed by Russian law starting next week and see what happens?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I mean, are you going to list it in Shanghai? So I was just going to say one final thing. I think I see a lot of appetite, but I don't see any real closure on how it's going to happen. There's a bit of a debate going on here, isn't there, macroeconomically, as to whether the center of gravity for Russian finance will move away from New York and London. I think if you look at the statistics for global M&A, I think if you look at the statistics for the amount of dollar transactions that flow through New York, I don't see that happening. And therefore, I'm also a little bit skeptical of a lot of the talk about de-dollarization multiple listings in Hong Kong or Shanghai, I think that's a number of years away. Although I can absolutely see why the Russian government is taking what I think are smart steps to follow the Chinese model of becoming independent from the dollar to some degree. And that's beginning to get a bit political, so I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Robin. Ну что, мы услышали достаточно
So we have listened to rather skeptical just a description of our transactions, and I would like to add some positive aspects, and the next speaker will be Maria Miroshnikova, who will try and tell us about the new possibilities offered by the Civil Code. Just a brief remark. We are listening quite attentively, and probably we could simplify our legislation. We are not doing it on purpose because you treat you well enough, and we want you to become unemployed, to be left without job. Maria Miroshnikova, she will tell us about the changes to the Civil Code and how practically novelties or innovations can be used in real M&A transactions that will increase the number of time.
Now, I would like to mention in this context that we won't be jobless in the near future, thanks to our legislation in Russia, and in particular in view of the amendments of the tax code, the AGIC laws of Foreign Control Companies Law, enacted in January this year. I would like to say that this is not the only circumstance that leads to a certain high level of activity in the field of corporate deals. There is an integrated process, the search for solutions that will make it possible to adapt the existing ownership structures to the changes of the tax code, but on the other hand would protect the property of the entrepreneurs in Russia from the sanction risks. That's what Robin says. He says that many of the legal consultants today are looking for these integrated solutions, and in our practice we call them asset grab. That will help under the situation when the risks is immediate, the risks of sanctioning, or according to the client, it's going to be too dangerous to keep assets in foreign structures. It would be possible to bring them back to the Russian Federation. It's a difficult task, remembering that, again, the approach needs to be integrated. But if we wish to preserve the existing structures abroad, because any trigger that works abroad must also work in Russia. And in the field of corporate legislation, there is nothing automatic at all. As for the practical implementation, these structures might come across serious problems. But this is not the topic of my presentation today, although I would like to say that as for the protection against sanctions, the choice of Singapore is not that obvious. When we look at the reaction of Singapore to sanctions, introduced by Canada, Australia, and the United States, we wouldn't recommend to our clients who have serious sanctional risks to transfer their structures to Singapore. It's possibly better to think about China or other Asian countries, because China and Singapore are not the same. But nonetheless, if we go back to deoffshorisation, it's a type of restructuring that happens and occurs under the impact of certain factors, and the tax code amendments either lead to a rather uncomfortable situation when the if a company doesn't want to be public for legal purposes in order to protect the corporate property, it becomes transparent to the tax authorities, which creates a threat of the leak of information. But that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, there are serious political risks of the sanctions being strengthened, changed, and the new sanctions might appear. And as a result, clients make a decision to de-offshorize. What are the consequences of the decision? For the clients. In case business belongs to one individual, it's understandable what should be done. It's not an easy exercise. It's necessary to work in several jurisdictions. Corporate reorganization needs to be carried out, a serious tax analysis so that a transfer to Russia is painless and does not lead to a heavier tax burden. Situation is more difficult when business belongs to several partners. And sometimes between these partners there is an agreement on how they carry out business. And these agreements usually structurized on the basis of a foreign law agreement between the shareholders. The most commonly used law is the English law. And the first question asked by the clients in the circumstances when we have to transfer this agreement to the Russian soil is how can we do it? What if we change the foreign holding for a Russian holding? Let's preserve the agreement and just change this particular provision. Is that possible? Is it possible at all to choose a solution that is predictable from the point of view of the results and cost? Well, the answer is not that simple. On the one hand, at present, amendments of the code make it possible to preserve the English law as applied, but that's only in case there is a foreign element. It's positive that the legislator speaks about this openly. Until then, now there was just speculation, and many believe that the corporate dispute is going to be considered following the law of the country of domicile. So, but still there is a lot of unresolved matters, and I cannot agree with Tatiana here. No, the amendments concerning liabilities and responsibilities, the enforcement of this law is planned for June this year. Tatiana mentioned some of them. At long last, we're going to resolve the matter of options, and for the shareholders it's most important because the options, put and call options, are being used everywhere, and all the agreements regulated by foreign law just with the purpose to provide a proper exit for the parties if there are certain triggers enacted, or to resolve the situation when it is a sort of a deadlock, or as a measure of protection of rights if one of the parties violates the shareholding agreement. So it is difficult to overestimate this particular novelty. The same is true for indemnities and for the losses that can be that can be compensated in case when the party comes across the most difficult set of information of circumstances. Well, of course, I quite agree with Tatiana. It is necessary to mention in this context that the issue has been settled, that indemnity or the provision on indemnity can be applied in case of corporate agreement, even in that case when the party is an individual and not a legal entity. But it's we're talking in positive terms. So an English agreement is transferred to Russian soil, but the devil is in details, as we know, and the legislator here is halfway towards the solution. The amendments enacted next month lead to a necessity to change the special laws concerning joint stock companies and limited liability companies. Here is the example of the Institute of Options. Beginning with June, it is going to be in forms as uncalled offerta, or the liability that provides for the transfer of certain property. If it is an uncalled offerta, then without no, of course, there must be a notary certification, but I'm sure that the notaries are not going to work with these documents beginning with June this year. We cannot rely on them. And then there is another very important issue. Joint stock company agreements, can they go through the arbitrage court or not? No, the intentions were quite positive. Historically, if we go back and look at the amendments of the Arbitrage and Procedural Code, which actually clearly defined the jurisdiction of this type of disputes, and then everybody watched the courts and how they were going to apply the norm. In reality, the worst scenario developed, and I am referring to the definition of the Supreme Court and the Supreme Arbitrage Court of 2012, which not that openly but nonetheless supported the following position: the agreements associated with the acquisition of sale, and that was the case of Maximov and Maxi Group and non-payment for the shares. So this dispute should not go through the arbitrage court. What was the final result? It was revoked, and actually that position stands. After that, the practice is quite negatively developing in this field, and we can find just a few decisions of different type, and without positive regulation we can hardly do. It's good, though, that on the 8th of May this year, at the State Duma now received the draft law on arbitration, which established the presumption of the arbitration, and so if the law is adopted, these disputes will be able to go through the arbitrage and arbitration without certain exceptions. On the whole, I can say that legal community cannot but appreciate the reform of legislation that is being carried out, and we believe that it is extremely important. At the same time, allow me to criticize it, because in certain cases we are going too far indeed. This concerns such issues as the unregulated relations, but they're regulated now quite unexpectedly for lawyers by an imperative. I'm talking about a dead-end situation. Beginning with the 1st of September 2014, there is a responsibility, a duty for the corporations not to take the situation to such a level when functioning is impossible, to a level when the functioning is difficult. So it's a deadlock situation. So for the company to act, a decision needs to be taken, and meetings have to be arranged, and if the parties do not do that, then irrespective of what kind of options they agree to in their contract, any of the parties within this legal entity can apply either for its liquidation or in relation of non-public operation. They can apply for the exclusion of the particular party or an individual who took the company to the level of a deadlock. We believe that these amendments in this form are quite dangerous, and they limit the freedom of contract and the agreements between the shareholders, because they can level out the provisions on which the parties agree. So deoffshorisation is a risky approach for the shareholders who either have minority stock, and to be more precise, for those who do not have the operational control in the company. And that is really goes back to the historical situation with the control in the companies. If you replace the foreign holding, replace it with the Russian holding, then the situation is a losing situation for the minority holders. And had I represented the interest of the minority shareholders, I would insist on getting certain rights for the assets of the company. But in a Russian corporation, there must be one executive authority, and by law it has very extensive authority. And as for those who appoint the director rule, that's a specific feature, and we always warn foreign investors about that. And in principle, the legislation now makes it possible to create a system of checks and balances, and to foresee in the statutory documents of the company that there are several individuals acting together as directors. Actually, it works in practice, and the tax authorities accepting these declarations, stating that there are 3 or 4 directors in the company. It is permissible, and this has been tested. And finally, I need to say that there is a lot of different issues, and I could continue, of course, with our discussion, but the transfer of the English agreements to our country is not mechanical, not automatic. Time is needed, involvement is needed. Partners in business must be patient and deeply involved, and of course you need assistance of professional lawyers, and develop your know-how in the absence of judicial practice. And I'm quite sure that Russian law firms will be willing to share this know-how with you. Thank you for your attention.
Just on this, I agree, with a lot of what was said. Just one comment. I think that the Russian legislation did a very smart thing in about 2009, 2010 in relation to depository holdings. And notwithstanding all of these legal changes, since 2010 and the Moscow refinery deal, which I'm pretty proud to say I structured, so, I've always felt you can say to any foreign investor, if they ask you the direct question, can you structure an onshore JV? The answer is yes. Can you deliver everything with an onshore JV that you could do with an offshore JV? The answer is and has been yes since about 2010. I think for me the issue is, can you, without some complications, using depository arrangements, sometimes onshore, offshore, and using international institutions to give effect to it, can you cut away that and do it directly without the tier of depository arrangements? My personal view is, I think Russian law will get there. I think how it will get there is that it will see how the depot structured deals work and just apply them directly without a filter. One other comment about Singapore and the merits of Singapore, of which I have no particular view. I'm not Singaporean. I think we have 2 things going in different directions. The clear impetus for onshorization. I think we have had for a long time the legal mechanics for onshorization. It's largely just detail of how it works. It is at the current moment it is complicated to make it happen, but you can make it happen. I think what you have now, though, is in the current geopolitics, it's not always easy to convince a Russian client they want to onshorize for a range of reasons, which have nothing to do with, a lot to do with dispute resolution and enforcement in other places. And I think it's even more difficult to convince, for example, just to pick one, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund that they want to be in an onshore vehicle as opposed to have at least their equity in an offshore vehicle. And so I think, to go back to what I was saying, we're going to have a truncated structure, 2-level structure, where you have some of the equity offshore and some of it onshore, and for a period of time in the biggest deals, the most complex deals, you're going to still have these depository arrangements to create a constructive onshore joint venture. And I think, I can't really predict, but it's 3 to 5 years away before there'll be what you might call an absolute proper onshore big joint venture.
Спасибо огромное. Я тоже хотел добавить комментарий, что интересно.
Thank you very much. I would like to add that that is a very interesting law on controlled foreign customers, and another feature was added to corporate relations that is quite interesting, because now you can voluntarily acknowledge yourself as a tax resident of the Russian Federation. You might abandon all the legal structures according to the English law, and you will not be regarded as a foreign company being a tax resident of the Russian Federation. Some customers are considering this trend, realizing that it is not convenient to have bank accounting following the Russian rules, but the fact of retaining the Anglo-Saxon law, and they hesitate to pass on to shareholders' agreement without any judicial practice. So many people might transfer the tax residents from Cyprus and other companies to the Russian tax residents. And the next speaker will be Rupert Boswell.
On the Russian M&A market.
I'd just like to say that partners in my firm
I think you need to press, yeah.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mika. I'd like to say partners in my firm have been coming to the St. Petersburg Forum since it began, and word did finally reach London as to how impressive and original the concept was, the mix of politics and business and law, so much so that in London a couple of months ago we had the very first global legal summit. And I'm fairly convinced that they've actually cut and pasted the exact same program and design of the handout, because when I came and got it, I recognized it immediately. So it's a pleasure to be here. I've been asked to give a perspective as a lawyer in a firm with offices in London, Hong Kong and Singapore on the M&A market. We're a mid-market corporate firm with a couple of partners who've focused on the Russian market for many years, and talking to them and also to our partners in Hong Kong and Singapore, it's interesting the different perspective as between a London-based one and an Asian-based one. And my comments are going to be a bit more anecdotal and less technical than some of the other speakers. I would just say that it's been quite an emotional journey from London, looking out during the difficult times of the last 18 months, and the experience of having such a large economy be subject to sanctions, and then for different reasons, obviously with the decline in the currency, and how I think because there are so many Russians in London and so many businesses associated with England, there was actually an expectation that there was a much bigger share of the UK banking sector committed to Russia than is in fact the case. It is actually less than 1%, and that's true even of Germany and Japan. And so I think that came as a big surprise in terms of the impact. And so I think the other point I'd make is that the way that the press portray the issues related to Russia, the Financial Times and other places, you never get the business voice that is said quietly and privately. It's forever the sort of party line, and actually the consistent message we have from CEOs and CFOs of multinational clients that we have is that they see their investments in Russia as long-term, and those of them that have an appetite for Russia that they've always had are still looking to invest in Russia. We have a lot of Asian clients, particularly Japanese clients, and the message certainly from them has been they want to protect their JVs, they're looking for new JVs as long as there's a proper sense of confidence of support from the Russian Federation. And certainly even the classic kind of city-type businessman, what they say quietly isn't what gets reported, of actually wanting to have a long-term stake in Russia. And in terms of actual deals, just sharing with you some experiences, because I know that not everybody here is a technical lawyer. It was interesting to me that we were acting for a very well-known Russian bank on a deal earlier this year where it was all ready to close, and then at the very last minute we were told, no, it's not going to close. And there was no business reason for doing it. It was actually, it seemed to us, although we weren't told it in these terms, a political reason of just not being seen to invest. And maybe lots of people in this room know that, but that was, and I was actually taking a few soundings from some corporate lawyers yesterday on the feel of that. So as a normal, M&A lawyer is always frustrated when deals don't close, but that's a sort of new reason that's in a sense counterintuitive and going the other way. But at the same time, I would say that it's interesting, although the US is obviously the source of the sanctions that scare people the most, actually the number of US companies that are still investing in Russia is significant. And we were approached only 6 weeks ago by a US company, not in the oil and gas sector, but in a food sector, who was looking to buy a company in northwest Russia. And they are a classic US company, and they get all the noise, but they're going to do it anyway because they see the opportunity. And so I think that that flavor of what it feels like from London, I know a lot of you are associated with London and travel there and talk to people, is how it feels to me in seeing deals that are happening. And certainly in terms of the cast list of Asian countries, I mean, Robin touched on that and some other speakers, certainly we've seen, and I go to Beijing and Shanghai a lot, a real willingness now, and I think there are deals starting, the Chinese deals, real deals, and not just state deals. I think Japan, although expresses a lot of enthusiasm, actually delivering on that is slower, shall we say. Korea, I think there's enthusiasm, but it hasn't really started. But I feel that in some ways, there's unintended consequences in life, aren't there? There are good unintended consequences and bad unintended consequences, and you often don't predict the good. And if you are looking for a good that's come out of recent events, it is actually, if I may say, with an English hat, to use Russians, that actually looking globally, looking to India, looking to Asia, really exploring those relationships in the long term, although it's not an enjoyable time at the moment, actually is a good thing, and I think is a good thing for the world. So those are my sort of high level thoughts, Mikhail. I know we're short on time.
Thank you very much. So back to the point you raised, that there could be developments in the private deals with the Asian countries. I would like to give the floor to Wei Jin. Wei Jin, can you just give a general description on what's the attitude of the Asian investors towards the Russian assets, towards the Russian deals, towards the financing and the price evaluation of the assets? So whether any developments in the Russian law will help convince the Chinese investors to use Russian law instead of the English one?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes. Добрый день.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the forum for the possibility to communicate and to exchange their opinions and their experience with the Russian colleagues. Our law firm is called King and Wood Mallesons, is one of the largest law firms in China and Asia, but this is for the first time that we participate in this forum. Frankly speaking, I'm not a specialist in M&A, and I understand that this theme and this discussion on the M&A, but I mainly specialize in the sphere of infrastructural projects, and I inspect and I consult the Chinese customers related to their infrastructural projects abroad. For instance, the investment in power plants, in railways, and others. So I have come here. This is the first time that I have come here. I'm mostly listening to the presentations and mostly learning, but since this is a discussion, I will try to answer the questions which Michael has asked me. So the first question is the trend of cooperation between China and Russia. As all of us know, in connection with the Western sanctions, lately, much has been said about Russia's pivot towards the east. I think that these are not only the talks, but that is really taking place. The policy, the number of transactions with Russia are increasing. According to the data of the Commercial Ministry of China, the inflow of direct Chinese investments in Russia based on the results of 2012 was $4.8 billion versus $660 million in 2012. So the increase was 80%, and there is a growing interest of our Chinese customers to investments in Russia, particularly in the last 2 years. This is related with strengthening of the political relations between the two countries, which, and there are some increases as well. And China has started realizing the program One Band, One Road, as it is called. This program involves the investments into the infrastructure of the common economic band of the new Silk Road, which passes in Central Asia and in Russia, part of it. Russia has an immense potential for the development of infrastructural projects related to transportation and power engineering and energy. As we have noticed, our Chinese customers are very much interested in such projects. But frankly speaking, though the level of development of the Russian-Chinese investment cooperation at present does not quite comply with the level of political and trade relations between the two countries. I mean, M&A transactions are not very numerous, but I'm quite sure that the cooperation of these two countries will add an impetus to the new development. So that was an answer to the first question. As to the second question, I think the sectoral investments are most interesting for the Chinese investors. Thus, I have already mentioned that new program, One Band, One Road, and that will provoke the highest interest of the Chinese investments. They are mostly interested in infrastructure in the sphere of transportation, and one of the latest examples is construction of high-speed railway from Moscow to Kazan. One of our customers now think about investment into that major project, and it seems to me that the main trends of investment activities in Russia was the production of minerals, forestry, trade, electrical appliances, communications, and so on. And the third question is, what law will be used as a basis for transactions with the Russian partners? I think this question is related to the investment activity of two countries. The transactions that just presuppose the freedom of choice of the law. In that case, the Chinese investors prefer the substantive law of the third countries, such as Singapore, the UK, and Sweden, as the law that would provide the basis for the agreement and settlement of the disputes. In cases when the countries cannot choose a law, are not free in choosing the relevant law, as we know.
In the concession projects in Russia, for example, we know that a different law cannot be chosen. So on the whole, we do not have any fear of Russian law, but the absence of practice and the absence of the more detailed knowledge of the Russian law is there. And then, of course, the amendments that are so common for Russian legislation makes us very careful. And the Chinese investors are not quite ready to apply the Russian law. And we understand, of course, that the Russian investors do not find it easy to work with the Chinese law, so it's mutual. And apart from law, the Chinese investments are also are not quite ready to interact with the Russian judicial system. And although we understand that the Russian judicial system has reliable institutions within it, and the arbitrage courts, for example, but still, since we are short of practice and knowledge, the Chinese investors are not quite sure that the Russian judicial system works the way we like it. So that for that purpose, we prefer the international arbitration. Remember the ICC, and that's what we prefer to use. So, and Mikhail, I have one other issue. Well, unfortunately, with limited time, it's difficult. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, I wanted to leave 10 minutes for the questions of the audience to the speakers and discussion. If there is a need to discuss and to ask questions and to get answers. If otherwise, you can feel free and enjoy freedom. Now, that's wonderful. That means our presentations were detailed. Because actually I do not have any answers, and I'm happy that there are no questions. So if there are no questions, then allow me to draw some conclusions. First of all, the number of deals, M&A deals, has went down, minus 57%. That's statistics. Nothing good about that. Second, we heard from our Western colleagues, from Robin, that we have gone through phase one, stagnation and lockdown. We are getting adapted to the existing rules and getting used to the new money, non-financial methods and non-bankable deals. We heard from the anti-monopoly service and from Thomson Reuters that Western investors are coming, Americans, surprisingly enough. But this is, well, not that surprising. Americans are always there ahead of them. But considering the aggressive American sanctions, that's interesting. But Firmenfam Schlumberger deals, major deals, show that the foreign investors are still there. And China displays interest, but as we can hear, mostly private sector infrastructural projects, but the private sector is not that popular with the Chinese, but there are prospects, we hope. And I liked what Maria said. She said we will never be jobless, and allow me to add, we will have more work, but not right away, because the new civil code with practice acquired in 3 years, plus minus, will well, if today 80 to 90% of deals with English law, even if we reduce this number down to 60 to 70, that means there will be much more work to do for the Russian lawyers. And deoffshorisation will make it possible for us to earn quite some money within the next 18 months. And the new civil code, well, will work for us as well in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you.